sort of seen a difference over the last few years? Because I think you were particularly pioneering in the documentaries that you were doing, and one of the first proper public figures of recent times to really start talking about these issues. Have you really noticed a shift over the last few years in these kind of discussions?
Yeah, definitely. Like, when I started out, there wasn't a discussion. There was no discussion. There was no real awareness. No one really spoke about problems. Everyone just drunk themselves into a hole, as far as I could see. Everyone was still putting plasters on things, and no one was very vocal about the fact that they were struggling at all. Because I think a lot of people, because of the lack of awareness, weren't even aware themselves, myself included. But yeah, there's a huge shift. Even when I go into schools, prisons, places where you wouldn't necessarily assume there to be a conversation around mental health going on. And when I was a kid, the phrase mental health didn't exist. It wasn't a term I was aware of. It was just mental. He's mental. She's mental. It was used as as a derogatory term. Whereas now there are children who are able to discuss mental health and are beginning to have some understanding, which is, for all the awareness though, the thing that worries me is that everyone, especially corporations, want to have, and don't think I wasn't a lippy little shit in front of places like KPMG. When I was at KPMG and the bosses were sat there, I was like, it's all well and good having these discussions, but it's on you now to start actioning things. Because if you want to make people aware of the fact that it is okay to be forthcoming about your mental health conditions in the place of work, and make them aware that there's no punishment or shame that's going to come with that, then you need to be prepared to have the support in place that they need once they've told you about it's been a good week as well. I've learned loads, the fact that I still use bad language when talking about mental health, when I'd be like, people need to be able to admit their problems or confess their problems. It shouldn't be an admission. It's not a crime. But it's so ingrained in us to refer to things, the term commit suicide comes from a time when it was a crime, that rhymed, to take your own life. And we've moved on from that, but how far? People still use that term really flippantly.
Yeah, there's a lot of language issues, isn't there, around it?
And I think there's also something to be aware of, which is a hyper-awareness, which is where people become too aware and concerned, because we all have good and bad days. That doesn't equal depression. There's a real difference between being upset, between being sad, between having a bad day and being depressed. And I worry that through all this conversation that there will be an overdiagnosis. And when we did Learning to Adult Slowly, the podcast live, and I asked Simon about that. Simon chairs a calm campaign against living miserably, and he didn't even hesitate to say yes, it is a concern of his, that everyone will start beginning to think that one bad day means that they're depressed, and people will start throwing it around, and then it will take away from what depression actually is and the severity of depression when people are actually suffering.
There's something about being a human, that your life will involve a lot of trauma, and probably if you're lucky you'll get a lot. At worst, you'll get more than your fair share. So there is something around that. But you're right, it's interesting, the idea of having support networks around you, though, or places to go to if you are in the shit. I think that personally speaking, one of the places that I the only time that I really did seek help when I needed it was at university, and they had a really visible kind of counselling service, which literally rammed what they did down everyone's throat. So it was really easy to kind of go, actually, I need a bit of help. And it was quite a nice thing to have that. But I think a lot of workplaces are still quite far behind that, aren't they? Is that what you think?
Yeah, and doing some of the convention last week and talking in front of people that I wouldn't normally. It was quite interesting because afterwards I saw the direct effect, because I hung around for a little while and was there between talks and spoke to people that were present for the panel. And they, some people said to me that their bosses were there, and they hope that that's given them insight, because they'd previously been handed disciplinary action because of their mental health issues, ultimately. And there are people, there was others who said, I wish my boss was here. And it's kind of it's such a weird one, because it's great that some of the bosses were there, but quite often I've done talks, I've gone to Parliament and shown documentaries, and the only people in the room are people who already care and already have an understanding and already agree, and there's no point in preaching to the choir. You know, you need to challenge people. Those talks need to take place in front of people who have differing opinions. And so I can work out what mine are as well, not just, you know what I mean? It's important because it has to, the challenge has to go both ways. It can't just be me speaking and my word being taken as gospel. There needs to be some sort of challenge so I can work out what I'll stand on the table for. That's how you form opinions.
Sure.
Is by having discussion. But it's it's difficult getting it in front of the right people, but there are still people that exist who haven't, and lucky for them as well. It's not like I wish depression or anxiety on people, but there's a lot of people who do come from an age who haven't died yet. They're on their way, but you know what I mean. There's a lot of people who are from a time where you just pull yourself together and get on with it.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that survived a generation of people, you know, that my dad didn't, because he took his own life because he couldn't put himself and get it together.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, that is the only way to get through things, and that's the negative aspect of people that we have in quite senior positions in a lot of companies.
Yeah.
That we need to inform and we need to encourage to make change.
Yeah, it sort of feels like there's you know, there's kind of like reached there's a great momentum now around this kind of stuff, and I think that necessarily means that there are some things coming out that make you a bit cringy, and things that, you know, people entering the conversation, it feeling like a bit of a trend, but it kind of almost feels like a necessary corrective as well, like, because there was no conversation, as you said. So now that there's a lot, that's great, and then hopefully it can kind of filter down and get normalised wherever we can.
I think normalising the conversation is the most important thing. So it's not something that people shy away from or just ignore or pretend doesn't exist because of a lack of their own education or experience.
Yeah, completely. How have you found it personally, sort of working on all this stuff? Because it is, you know, you've been doing a lot of campaigning and things, but has it reflected in your life and your how you are with sort of like your mates and things like that? Have you kind of been taking a lot of the learnings or approaching life in a slightly different way?
I've learned loads throughout the whole experience. I think my friends have as well. One friend in particular, Felix, my best friend, I've known him since we were about 6 or 7. And when he saw that, I've never actually watched Suicide of Me, the documentary that I did about my dad's suicide for the BBC. But he watched it and he called me and he was he was upset. But he said, you know, I feel like I know you so much better now, and you make so much more sense, because we had never had conversations that he saw me have, and he had never seen sides of me that he saw in that documentary in day-to-day life. So I think that was the beginning of it all for me, really, anyway. Well, just before that, a radio documentary that I did. But that was kind of the starting point. But even this week, I was on a panel with a guy called Chris Connor, who's 20 years deep into meditation now, and he's one of the prominent figures, and he's a great voice in it. And he said a line that really, really resonated with me and that stuck, which was, "Don't believe everything you think." I was like, fuck. I'm going to use that, but I'm going to credit you wherever I do, because it's really good. And later on in the week, Tanya Byron was explaining that basically the part of your brain that deals with fight or flight is the temporal, I believe, is the middle part of your brain, not the frontal. So the frontal part of your brain is your logic and your reason, and the middle part is where you deal with fight or flight. And you have these two little receptors, and if you encounter chronic stress, they become much more heightened, and a lot of what you think, you start to deal with really, really mundane situations with that part of your brain, and you're in a constant panic. And it's not, not everything that you think is true. That's the part of your brain which ends up with you, and me especially, it leaves you catastrophizing. And I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but a lot of people I talk to, we all do the same things. We create these situations and preempt these disasters and worst case scenarios, and it's that part of your brain. And it's relearning, it's learning to go, that's not a rational thought. And I've learned to do that for the most part, and they still last a little while sometimes, but I've got a hell of a lot better with making use of the front part of my brain, which is a lot easier to do if I put certain things into practice, not least of all sleeping. It's amazing what sleep does.
Have you kind of got a sleep ritual now?
No, I wish I did. I don't have Nah, I wish I did that, but it's impossible. I
just doing it at some
schedule
point.
this week, yeah, but just
Yeah.
making sure I do get to sleep at some point.
Yeah.
I slept really well last night, actually. I was watching Jailbirds on Netflix, fell asleep at some point, and then woke up to my alarm. My waking word this morning when my alarm went off, because I normally wake up before my alarm, but I've got a horrible alarm on my phone, and I just woke up going no. But here we are.
Fight or flight is quite interesting, especially in the digital age where we're kind of reacting in a fight or flight situation about shit that's on our phone, things going wrong on our phones, and we're kind of...
Notifications, turn them all off, even if it makes your
Yeah.
missus or your boyfriend think you're cheating. You're not, you just get panicky if you see notifications, which is what I've done.
Yeah. But it's kind of driving us all bananas, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, it is, and it's weird. So Tanya Byron, the professor, and Chris Connor have very differing opinions around medication, which I found quite interesting as far as antidepressants and their usage. But they were both there were things that they both said that aligned with each other, and it's really important how you wake up and what you do in those first moments. Like, I was really guilty for a little while of looking at my phone straight away in the morning, and how you spend those initial moments waking up does kind of determine your day. You know the saying, oh, he's woken up on the wrong side of bed. It's normally because of what you encounter as soon as you wake up. So if you don't encounter, those things, if you're not aware of an email that you haven't read from the night before that you've woken up to and has stressed you out straight away, basically just don't look at your phone as soon as you wake up. Wake up, have a coffee, go for a walk, don't watch the news. Give yourself just a little bit of room and time to decide what you want your day to be.
I think that's really interesting, and one of the points that we keep on coming back to, I read a really great piece about how news, the constant influx of news, which is kind of a lot of what social media delivers, means that we're in touch with kind of disasters and pain and everything that's out there constantly. And it was a journalist, and they were in New York, and he was in a room, and the news of the Bataclan murders happened in Paris at the Eagles of Death on Metal gig. He said that the whole room suddenly was like silenced and shattered, and it was kind of remarkable, amazing that people are empathising and stuff. But it was also from the point of view of like, wow, everybody's taking on a lot of this stuff all the time. You don't really get an escape from it, which can't be a good thing. Right?
Which aligns with the fact that the world essentially is a safer place to be than it's ever been, but we're all much more aware of shit that's going on. And I mean, I haven't thought about it in that context, but it's not good to know everything that's going on all the time and to be constantly aware of it, because it also takes you out of your life. And it's not to say that you shouldn't empathise with things going on elsewhere, or that you don't have a responsibility to what's going on, but yeah, it's just, I don't think you always need to know everything. And it's too much. The part of the problem as well is that we're not good at filtering stuff for ourselves, because everyone always gives social media, when people talk about social media, it's never really in a positive sense, is it? It gets quite a negative rap. And what about the responsibility that I, and you all have to just not consume as much crap?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really like the phone's yours. The phone's not the problem. If you don't pick the phone up, the phone's not a problem, right? It's you and what you consume, what you look at every day, and what you choose to continually go back to. Yeah. And it's difficult because it does become, it's rewarding, right? It triggers dopamine in the same way that sex or cocaine does. Yeah. It's a reward system. So, this is, and but what it also does is distract you. Like, I just see so many people, there's nothing worse than someone walking in front of you on their phone, and then they stop and you walk into the back of them, and then you got that awkward. So I don't use my phone much when I'm walking unless I'm really lost. But we need to just disconnect a little bit. But I think it comes down to us. I think we're more fortunate because we, obviously, you can tell by our age, we grew up without phones. Kids nowadays, are we giving them the tools that they need to filter? because it's important. I think that's where, there's alarming rates of depression and self-harm and anxiety in children of an age where it wasn't such a severe problem before. And I don't think that's because of the content on social media. I think it's because of the amount that they use their phones.
Yeah, purely the amount. It's because it's a comfort blanket, and I can see it with my own child who's 5. We've got him a tablet. It's like the worst thing that we ever did.
Bloody hell.
It's his little...
Yeah. Because it just as well, it's like if someone's ever a tool. I mean, I think we're moving towards people being somewhat socially inept. It's like you can't really empathise with a flat image, even if it's a picture of a face that you know and like. Yeah. Although saying that, if I see a picture of Donald Trump, I get angry, so maybe it does work. But you know what I mean? Like, you can't. It's just when we're not engaging in the same way that we did with each other, because we communicate largely. Like, I'll be in my house talking to and it's not like my house is that big. I wish it was, but you know what I mean. I'll be talking to we've got a group on my WhatsApp called Gaff Gang, and it's just me and all my housemates, and we'll be in the same bloody house talking to each other by WhatsApp. Whatever happened to opening the door and shouting? Turn that fucking music down.
Can we talk a little bit about sort of being a performer and how you kind of manage that? Because obviously being on stage, I imagine, is incredible, and you feel invincible, and it must be such a kind of...
Not me, I was full off stage. No.
Yeah. But you know what I mean. Yeah. It kind of it must mean that the kind of lows are quite hard to take. I would have thought, just because you've kind of got all those people there and you're on a high.
I think what the difficult bit, and what happens to a lot of people early on, and did to me as well, is that I wasn't even, drugs weren't a problem. It was, I don't even think drink was a problem, but the amount I was drinking was probably too much. And that definitely creates lows that are beyond what I would otherwise feel. And what happens is you don't realise, because you're gigging pretty much every night. Almost, give or take. Or you've got, I say no to a lot of stuff now. No, that's something that I had to learn. Saying no to things is important. But so it would be an event or it would be a gig, and I'm with friends because I tour with people who I know. Which is really important for me, because that helps me stay grounded, not as in not becoming an egomaniac. I mean literally just having my grounding, which is really important for any of us to be anchored. But you come off, you do a gig, you have a good gig, you have a drink while you're on. So you have a drink before you go on stage, you have a drink while you're on stage, you come off, you're full of adrenaline, you've had a good gig, everyone wants to celebrate, so you have a drink. You get back on the tour bus, you carry on drinking, you go to bed, you wake up, feel a bit groggy, you get